right, so thank you to anybody watching this. My guest is Dr. Christopher Kaczor, who's a professor of philosophy at Loyola Marymount University in California. Among his many other areas of interest, Christopher writes and speaks extensively about bioethics and Catholic healthcare. He is author of 16 books, including Disputes in Bioethics and the Ethics of Abortion. Christopher is a corresponding member of the Pontifical Academy for Life. He appears widely in the media, including the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, etc. So thanks, Christopher, for agreeing to do this. Before we get started, I just want to give people a bit of background as to why we're doing this interview, particularly to anybody who might be watching who's not based in Ireland, but even to those based here who are living in Ireland. So we're just coming out of the most massive row about the relocation of the National Maternity Hospital to a new location that was recently given up by the Religious Sisters of Charity, who founded the first hospital for women in Ireland in the 1830s. So this has reignited a whole big debate about, will the Catholic Church have any influence over this hospital? The answer, by the way, is no. The apparent horrors of Catholic healthcare, how Catholic healthcare is a disaster for women, and particularly pregnant women. So this has been a really, really big thing for the last few weeks in Ireland, and has only died down recently because the government made this decision to relocate the National Maternity Hospital, and that was that. But it's left a very, very bad aftertaste, and the nuns got thoroughly demonized. So the purpose of the interview is to kind of remind people a little bit of the history of Catholic healthcare, its contribution to the world, the importance of the religious orders in this, and what are the basic principles of Catholic healthcare, and why ought we actually be proud of it and robustly defend it, and how it compares with its kind of secular autonomy-based counterpart. So we'll start off by, if you can give us a kind of a brief tour, if you like, of Catholic healthcare, its origins, going way back, how it's developed down to the present day. I know that's a lot to be asking. And has any other organization in history made a bigger contribution to healthcare worldwide historically than the Catholic Church? So how do you handle that question?
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm happy to talk about these issues with you. And when we think about Catholic healthcare, I think it's important to begin at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So in the life of Jesus, the Gospels report that he went around healing many people, healing lepers, healing people that were born blind, healing the woman who had a bleeding. And so the Gospels are filled with stories about Jesus caring for people that are sick. And Jesus actually commanded his apostles also to heal the sick. And so he sent them out on their first mission, and that was part of their first mission. And so early Christians were very much animated by the idea that they ought to love their neighbor as themselves. And so, when we're sick, what do we want? We want someone to care for us. We want someone to look after us. And if possible, we would like someone to heal us. And so early Christianity really began this ministry of healing. And so you find, for instance, after the Nicene Council, that in all towns that had cathedrals, also hospitals were established.
Which is 4th century on.
Was that?
4th century on.
Exactly, in the 4th century on, exactly. St. John Chrysostom established a number of hospitals in the place where he was bishop. And all of this is public knowledge. I encourage everyone who's interested in this history to check out a book called Medicine and Healthcare in Early Christianity. It's by Dr. Gary Ferngren. It's Johns Hopkins University Press, 2016. And in that book, he really goes over all this history, which is quite extensive. And part of the distinctiveness of Christian healthcare was that it was open to everyone. That is to say, early Christians took care of Christians and also took care of non-Christians. And this is obviously very early in the development of medicine, but they risked their own lives, taking care of people that were victims of plagues, caring for those that were sick and dying. And so this has really been a very central part of Christian outreach. And it's really an extension of the Christian idea that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. And therefore, we should love our neighbor also in his or her bodily well-being. I mean, part of it is spiritual, so it helps your neighbor to teach and to help your neighbor, helps your neighbor to learn, how to read, and that's why Christianity also established schools. But part of our well-being is physical, bodily, and so Christianity focused also on bodily well-being and bodily care. And out of this impetus to care for the body of people, we have Christian healthcare arising.
And what happened, what was happening before Christians arrived on the scene? Because obviously there was doctors, but there appeared to be very few hospitals, maybe military hospitals in Roman times and that kind of thing. So what was it like a doctor came into your home or something? Was that how it worked?
Well, there was care of soldiers, for instance, after battle. Mm-hmm. But you can see a kind of utilitarian goal for that. In other words, if I'm the king, I'm going to want my soldiers to be, healed after battle so they can go back and fight again. So what was distinctive about Christian healthcare was that it wasn't geared toward that kind of narrow self-interest. So it wasn't just for soldiers that got injured in battle so as to return them to battle. It was for, old women who, are not going to be in battle, and children who are, again, not going to be fighting. And again, it was geared to both Christians and also non-Christians. In fact, the sociologist Rodney Stark made an argument that is part of the reason that Christianity spread so rapidly in the ancient world, is that Christians were quite well known for reaching out to those in need, including non-Christians. And so some of these people, when they were cared for, became curious about, well, what's motivating these people to care for me? I don't know them, I'm not part of their family. And so Christians really spread their faith quite dramatically through this healthcare ministry.
Yeah, you see, what strikes me as I've kind of read into the subject is there's a sort of assumption that when a civilization or society gets to a certain point of development, hospitals automatically appear. But this is not the case. So I was very struck when the first lockdown happens and COVID-19 comes out of Wuhan, and I'm reading a bit around this, and I see the first hospital ever in Wuhan, which at this point is hundreds of years old, and of course Chinese civilization is thousands of years old. There was no hospital in Wuhan before a Franciscan Italian missionary comes along and founds one in the 1880s. And then other missionaries, Protestant and Catholic, do the same thing in other parts of China. And when Christians arrive in different parts of the world, Africa, for example, other parts of Asia, there's no hospitals. So therefore, this idea that, well, hospitals automatically appear because it's something we naturally do, actually, it kind of forgets the Christian roots of all this. And also, and you might comment on this, the religious orders have been extremely important in the foundation of these hospitals. So you might like to comment on that, please.
No, that's exactly right. As I'm sure you know, there are some religious orders whose whole mission is healthcare. They are founded precisely to care for people that are in need. And also there's other religious orders that maybe don't have healthcare as their primary focus, but nevertheless really do make a contribution. So I'm thinking, for instance, about the Jesuit order and St. Aloysius Gonzaga. Part of his story was that he was ordered when a novice to care for people that were suffering from the plague. And this was part of his spiritual development. And that's true even to today. I know that Jesuit novices care, for instance, for infirm elderly at a local elderly home nearby where I live. Okay. So this sort of impetus to care for others, it very much is at the heart of a kind of Christian love of neighbor. Because again, we have obviously spiritual needs. So if I'm feeling guilty, if I'm feeling alienated, I need the help, spiritual help, you might say. But we also have bodies. We are physical beings. And so part of caring for people is caring for their bodily well-being. And so that's why the church has established hospitals, and also why the church, for instance, has done so much to feed hungry people, right? To provide shelter for homeless people, to reach out to people in their physical bodily needs. So healthcare is an important part of that for sure. And there are some religious orders that dedicate themselves to that mission.
And this supplies provides a ready supply of people who have no families of their own, so they can devote themselves fully to these tasks. And I think that's one of the reasons that, when Christianity arrives in these other countries, they don't have anything like orders of nuns who are prepared to do this kind of thing. I mentioned the religious sister charity earlier, who are at the center of this controversy about the relocation of the National Maternity Hospital. And I said they founded the first ever hospital for women in Ireland, almost as soon as penal law was lifted, by the way, because of course they couldn't do it under penal times. So as penal laws begin to be lifted in the first decades of the 19th century, they come right out. Some of these women left comfortable lives for their time. It's founded by a woman called Mary Aikenhead. And then they found the first hospital for women. There's a big there's a big cholera outbreak in Dublin about the same time. They go straight in. They found the first ever hospice in Ireland, and so on. Now we just turn around and say to them, well, you also ran Magdalen homes and mother and baby homes, so we're going to forget all the good you did and take it for granted and assume that the good stuff would have happened anyway without any of the bad stuff. But just to look at the basic principles and aims of Catholic healthcare, what are they and how do they overlap with the earlier tradition of Hippocratic medicine?
So Catholic healthcare is founded on a fundamental principle that all human beings have intrinsic dignity and value. And if that's true, you would say also that elderly and sick human beings still have that basic intrinsic dignity and value. So given that premise, Catholic healthcare is based on helping these people in their time of need as best as possible. Now, obviously, it's sometimes someone is so sick that, in fact, you can't heal them any longer, and they're just in the process of dying. But the Catholic tradition, of course, is not to abandon people when they're in the process of dying and say, well, tough luck for you, see you later. But really to accompany them even at the hour of their death. And so that's why, again, Catholic healthcare includes hospice care, and Catholic healthcare includes care for the infirm elderly, right? So the infirm elderly, there's no cure, right? You're not going to somehow reverse time and make a 95-year-old be 16 again. There's no cure at all. But the option is not, killing this person or just abandoning them, but really caring for them, to be with them, to comfort them, to be a friend to them as they conclude their life here on earth. So Catholic healthcare has an overlap with Hippocratic medicine in that the oath of Hippocrates, the idea, the medical oath that's taken by, or was taken by many physicians, includes a provision not to kill at the beginning of life through abortion, and also not to kill at the end of life. And this is really based, again, on this idea that human beings have this intrinsic value and dignity. In secular terms, you might talk about this as universal human rights, right? The idea that I have dignity and value, even if I'm very young and vulnerable and dependent in utero. I also have value, even if I'm very old and, in need of help because I'm an infirm elderly person. So the fact that someone's not vigorous and young and rich and productive, in the Catholic view, that doesn't count against you. In fact, that's a reason to help you, right? If we take seriously Jesus' idea in the Gospel of Matthew that I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink, I was naked and you clothed me, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Well, you very well could say also, I was an infirm elderly person and you cared for me. I was a vulnerable baby and you looked after me. So Catholic healthcare is really very much an extension of this idea that every human being is made in the image and likeness of God. And so every human being deserves a fundamental care. And that's really the role of Hippocratic medicine too, to heal, right? Rather than to harm. Now, medicine, obviously, if you think of the goods of medicine, you can't think of the goods of medicine in terms of goods external to the practice. So a doctor might make a lot of money from doing whatever the doctor does, or a doctor might become famous through doing whatever he does. But those goods are really external to what medicine itself is. We think of the practice of medicine in itself, it, properly speaking, is about healing. And so the Hippocratic Oath is meant to keep that focus on healing, rather than get offline and distracted and get into goods that are external to medicine, like goods of making a lot of money or pleasing the political powers. Because medicine is so powerful that it needs to be focused and aimed, otherwise it can cause unbelievable harm. So think about in the French Revolution, the guillotine, right, was made by a doctor. He used his medical skill to make, a device that killed who knows how many thousands and thousands of people during the French Revolution. So, medicine can get, and we saw this in the Nazi times too, right, where doctors got completely off track rather than healing.
And not just them, by the way. Sorry to interrupt. Eugenics, of course, becomes very widespread and widely accepted by highly, quote unquote, respectable people in the first half of the 20th century in America, in Sweden, Denmark, the whole of Scandinavia, Switzerland, all embraced this eugenic view of medicine. These were the absolute leading doctors of their time, and who decided, well, okay, this is what we're going to do, because these lives, what's the point of them?
That's right.
Complete departure from Hippocratic medicine.
Oh, it's very far from Hippocratic medicine. I mean, think of the whole Holocaust actually began through Nazis putting to death what they called lives unworthy of living. So it started off with infirm people, disabled people, handicapped people, and they were first put to death. And again, the whole principle of that would be, look, not every human being has intrinsic value. Not everyone has a right to live. So we decide, if we're powerful, if we're in charge, we say, look, I decide who lives and who dies. And if you are economically productive, if you're contributing, in my view, to the well-being of society, well, then, okay, we'll let you live. But if you're not, if you're unwanted, if you're disabled, if you're on the margins of society, well, your life is not really worthwhile. So the Christian view is obviously the exact opposite of that, to say that everyone is has intrinsic dignity, or to put it differently, nobody is a nobody.
Yeah, well put. So secular healthcare, to give it that term, it has departed obviously from the Hippocratic and Catholic and Christian view of healthcare. In what ways?
Well, the modern healthcare ethic, you might say, in some respects, is an extension of the earlier Christian view. So if we think about autonomy, there is a rightful sense of autonomy. That is to say that I have primary responsibility for my own bodily well-being. And so I should take care of my own health. I should make sure I don't do things that needlessly endanger my life. I should not take my own life. I shouldn't harm myself. So all that has a kind of overlap. But I guess where it goes off track is in part the idea of the body. So in contemporary medicine, often there's what's called a body-self dualism. And what I mean by that is the idea would be the real me is my thoughts and beliefs and desires. And then this body is just sort of like a vehicle that I inhabit. And so if you have that view, then you say, well, look, the body really is not part of the intrinsic value of who I am. And so if I decide, oh, I don't really want my body anymore, I want to destroy myself, well, then the idea of some modern doctors is that, well, that should be facilitated, right? That should be helped. But I think Immanuel Kant was right, that whether I harm someone else or harm myself, that is always a violation of the principle that humanity is to be respected in my own person or in another, always as an end in itself, and never used simply as a means. But if I destroy myself so as to avoid, some unpleasant experiences, or to get the life insurance money for my family or whatever, I am, in fact, using myself simply as a means, just like if I kill someone else for the same purposes. So if we have this idea that all human beings have intrinsic dignity, and if we have the idea that our bodies are good, our bodies are not just a shell or a vehicle we're riding around in, our bodies are part of the goodness of who we are, because who we are bodily beings, right? We are embodied, you might say, following Aristotle, we are rational animals. In other words, this bodily stuff, this flesh and bones, is part of who I am. So I think that's an important point.
I guess the kind of philosophy you're talking about, that the body is a vehicle for my desires, full stop, and I can do what I like with it, leads to this idea. And by the way, this came up in the debate here. One of the things they said the Catholic hospital won't do, and this was a complaint, was so-called gender-affirming surgery. And you're kind of thinking, what would a maternity hospital be doing with so-called gender-affirming surgery? And of course, it's removing a healthy uterus from a woman who says she's a man. And the Catholic hospital won't do that. And the complaint is, well, okay, well, that's the person's choice, and how dare you violate it? So what's the Catholic justification for not removing the healthy womb of somebody who wants to take it out?
So what I'd say is that healthcare is aimed at healing. And so if you're going to remove bodily organs, that certainly can be part of healing. For instance, if, say, a woman has cancer in the uterus, and so they have to remove the uterus to stop the spread of the cancer. So there's nothing intrinsically evil in every case with removing, say, a uterus. That can be perfectly fine to remove cancer, and that's part of the healing process. On the other hand, when medicine veers away from the goal of healing, well, then there's really no limit to what medicine it could be ordered to. So for instance, let's say I go into the doctor and I say, this weekend, I'm going to have a big party, and I'd really like a lot of Vicodin, because I've heard that, these pills will really make the party fun, and I'll give each guest, 4 or 5 of them, and we'll really get high. It'll be great. Well, any doctor worth his salt or her salt, hopefully would say to me, look, as a doctor, my goal is healing. My goal is not to just give you whatever you ask for. So this medication that you're asking for is not actually going to help your bodily health. This is actually going to undermine your bodily health if you take, painkillers just for fun, just to, make the party better or something. And so in a similar way, it's true of other alterations or other treatments that I could ask for. So in earlier ages, there were a group called castrati. And so the castrati were people who had men who had their genitals removed in order to maintain their high singing voice. So, a 12-year-old boy, 13-year-old boy would have his genitals cut off so that he could maintain that childlike voice over the course of his adult life. Now, the church intervened and condemned that practice.
Although some of those castrati were in the Vatican choir, right?
I know, but they were in the Vatican choir, but it is also condemned by the Vatican. In other words, the practice of removing genitals in order to enhance your singing voice was something that was condemned. Now, what's the rationale for that? Well, the rationale is pretty straightforward, that our bodies are good. Our bodies are part of the gift of creation, and I should love my body, and also other people should love my body. So if I am harming my body, whether it's by removing my genitals to keep my singing voice like a child's, or whether it's chopping off an arm because I have body dysmorphia and I think my arm is some foreign entity. People that have those sorts of challenges in their life should be treated with compassion and should be treated with dignity. On the other hand, I don't think it's properly healing to remove healthy bodily organs when there's no disease. In other words, again, if the bodily organs are diseased and not healthy, that's a totally different thing. Yes, of course, if you have testicular cancer, maybe, and I'm not sure if this is the correct treatment, but it could be, theoretically at least, the best treatment for that may be to remove the genitals. Well, fair enough. I mean, if you've got testicular cancer, I'm not sure if that's the right treatment, but it could be. And if you have cancer of the uterus, maybe the right treatment is to remove the uterus. So I'm all for healing. I'm all for helping people to feel better. But I do think we have to also focus on healing. In other words, not just harming a healthy person's body.
So Catholic healthcare, and going back to earlier ancient Greek roots in Hippocratic medicine, doesn't kill any of its patients deliberately, whether in the womb or at the end of life. And it doesn't remove healthy body parts which are not, when it's not medically indicated. So why has Catholic healthcare got such a bad reputation and aroused such intense opposition?
I think part of it is that there are some people who view, for instance, abortion and suicide as good things. And you can understand why some people think that, because, I understand how an unplanned pregnancy can be a very challenging situation. I mean, I know from my own experience, when I was in college, my girlfriend got pregnant, and this caused me a lot of anxiety and a lot of challenge in my life. So I totally get that. And that's a normal thing. And I get too, from my own experience, in that my own mother conceived me in an unplanned pregnancy. And she went to a women's home run by nuns. And so that's the origin of my own life, that my mother was cared for by those religious sisters who helped her through a difficult situation and gave me a chance to be alive. But I do understand, because I've talked to my birth mother, and I do understand because I myself went through it, the kind of anxieties, the kind of challenge that an unplanned pregnancy can arise. But I think the church's teaching on these issues is something that's really grounded in reason. So let me make an argument to you about this issue that was given by an atheist. So there's a famous atheist philosopher named Don Marquis, and he said this: well, what's wrong with killing you or me, right? If someone were to break into your office right now and shoot you with a gun, what would be wrong with that? Or break into my office and shoot me, what would be wrong with that? Well, if someone kills you or me right now, that person's not taking away our past, right? We still have yesterday, we still lived, when we were younger. But what the person would do is take away our future, right? If you got killed today, you would no longer be able to enjoy your friends tomorrow. You wouldn't be able to learn anything new. You wouldn't be able to develop and grow intellectually. You wouldn't be able to experience the beauty of the world. And so what's wrong with killing you or me is that it takes away our chance for a valuable future. But the very same thing's true of killing a newborn baby. If you kill the newborn baby, you take away his or her chance for a valuable future. She's not going to make friends. She's not going to go to the movies. She's not going to experience the beauty of the world. And the same thing's true if you kill her prior to birth, right? She's not going to experience any of these beautiful things. You take away her chance for a valuable future. So the church's view on this is definitely not something that is sectarian or something that is based on kind of bizarre religious belief. It really is based on a fundamental belief that I hope many people today share, that all human beings have basic rights, that there is such a thing as human rights. But if there is such a thing as human rights, it's based on being a human being. And the newborn baby is a human being. The elderly infirm person is a human being. And the prenatal human being is a human being. And outside of the context of abortion, everybody recognizes this. Everyone recognizes that if a pregnant woman, gets murdered, that actually there are two individual human beings who've been killed. And that's why even in a place like California, if someone murders his pregnant wife, he's charged with 2 counts of murder. So again, outside of the context of abortion, everybody recognizes that there's 2 human beings involved. And that's why doctors treating pregnant women treat both patients. It's only in abortion that we kind of forget about this or try to obscure this or pretend like, oh, we don't know when life begins. Maybe life begins, 1 second before the baby's born. But if that's true, how come we can monitor the fetal heart rate months and months before the baby's born, right? If life really began after the baby's born, how could it be that a child in utero can die? I mean, everyone recognizes this, right? You can have a miscarriage, and this happens. It's sad for people, but they go in and they're pregnant, and the doctor says, "I'm very sorry, the baby has already died." But how could a baby die in utero if it weren't first alive?
No,
That's
absurd.
impossible. So the bottom line is, I understand why people, seek abortion. I get crisis pregnancy. I think that that's a reality. And that's why I think that all people of goodwill should really do what they can to support women in crisis pregnancies, because this is a very serious situation. This is, a life-altering situation. But I think the answer to a crisis like that is to love both of them, to love the woman who has a crisis pregnancy, and also to love his or her baby developing in utero, to love them both, because both of them have value and both of them deserve love and respect.
A complaint that sometimes gets made is that Catholic healthcare is a menace sometimes to expectant mothers, because you might have an ectopic pregnancy, or she might come into hospital miscarrying. There was a case like this in Ireland a number of years ago that caused a huge furore. And so long as there's a heartbeat, they won't kind of, if I can put it this way, expedite the miscarriage by terminating the pregnancy. They'll just let it take its natural course. And this therefore means that Catholic dogma is getting in the way of the proper care of expectant mothers. So in those kind of specific cases, ectopic pregnancy and miscarrying in women, how would you respond?
So with ectopic pregnancy, I've actually written a good deal about this, and there's a number of responses that are permissible and totally compatible with the principles that I've talked about of respecting every single human being. So for instance, in most cases of ectopic pregnancy, about 90%, the embryo actually has already died. And what happens in those cases is you have what's sometimes called persistent ectopic pregnancy. And what that is the placenta continues to develop and grow, but actually the embryo has already died. Now, in a case of persistent ectopic pregnancy, any treatment that is medically indicated is perfectly fine, because if the embryo's died, there is no issue, obviously, with intentional killing. So most cases of ectopic pregnancy can be treated in that way. There are a number of permissible ways of treating ectopic pregnancy, including, for instance, removing the entire fallopian tube. And this makes sense for another reason too, because if an ectopic pregnancy has already happened, the likelihood of it happening again goes way up. And so removing the fallopian tube is a way of protecting against future ectopic pregnancy. And ectopic pregnancy is very serious because if it's not caught and properly treated, that actually can lead to a woman hemorrhaging and a woman even dying. And that's part of the reason that Catholic healthcare protects the health of women. Abortion actually increases the likelihood of ectopic pregnancy. So there are some women who die from ectopic pregnancy because they had an abortion earlier, and because of that, they had an ectopic pregnancy, and then they ended up dying from that. So the pro-life view of not—
And there's hard evidence of that, is there?
Yeah, there's 3 published studies
Okay.
that talk about that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So, ectopic pregnancy is a very serious thing, and the pro-life view actually decreases the likelihood of ectopic pregnancy. In terms of a woman who's miscarrying, a similar principles are in play. In other words, any legitimate medical intervention is fine in order to save the life of the mother. And if you're talking about intentionally killing the child before birth, that is not a legitimate medical treatment. In other words, I'm not aware of any case in which the death of the child is necessary in order to preserve or protect the life of the mother. And I've looked into this quite extensively, and I just think it's fallacious to think that you actually need to kill in order to preserve the life of the mother. On the other hand, if you are at the end of pregnancy and you need to induce labor to preserve the woman's life, that is perfectly permissible. There's no problem with that at all. And that's something that's done by Catholic hospitals, and that doesn't violate any of the principles that we've talked about at all.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to finish with this question. So the future of Catholic healthcare, so it's under multiple pressures in the Western world. I mean, elsewhere not, because there's 5,000 Catholic hospitals worldwide, mainly in developing countries, and we're extremely glad to have them. But here, we're in our part of the world under increasing pressure around areas like conscientious objection, the right of a Catholic institution to refuse to carry out certain procedures. So the Australian state of New South Wales just passed a euthanasia law, and it says a religious healthcare facility must allow assisted suicide on premises if necessary by letting in a different doctor to do it. So so as the final question, how do we cope with these pressures?
I think it's really important for all people of goodwill to fight to support conscientious objection in medicine. And part of the reason for that is diversity. When you look at the practice of healthcare, if you want more white people and fewer people of color, if you want more men and fewer women, what you would do is undermine conscientious objection. Because people of color and women are on average more religious than white men. And so that's right. So if you force all hospitals and all healthcare, if you get rid of conscientious objection, what you're going to do is you're going to exclude more women from healthcare, and you're going to exclude more people of color. Secondly, what you're going to do is exclude some of the best practitioners of medicine. So in other words, as things currently stand, at least in the United States and I assume in Ireland, there's all kinds of healthcare professionals that are conscientious objectors, and some of them are really excellent. Now, if you force a conscientious removal of conscientious objection, what's going to happen is those people will be forced out of medicine. And what will that do? Well, given if we have the same demand for medicine, but we have fewer practitioners, what that's going to do is raise the cost of medicine for everybody, because there's going to be fewer medical professionals that can provide the services. But it's also going to reduce it's going to increase not only the cost, it'll also decrease the quality. And the reason is that if you now have a new litmus test, everybody has to have these views on abortion and euthanasia to be in medicine. Well, what that's going to do is now exclude some people that otherwise would have been in medicine. In other words, some people that would have, gotten in, some people on the A team now will be excluded. And so what happens? You have to go to the B team, right? If you're admitting 100 students at medical school and you exclude, half of them because they don't want to perform late-term abortions, well, now you have to go deeper into the list and now admit people that wouldn't otherwise not be admitted. But when you have people that otherwise wouldn't have been admitted into healthcare, that decreases the quality of healthcare for everyone. And a third reason is that this needlessly harms individual healthcare practitioners and their patients. So take a situation like I am in Los Angeles. So you have a Muslim doctor, Dr. Kaczor, and she's seeing patients. And now all of a sudden the law says you have to perform late-term abortions. You have to do euthanasia.
Yes.
Well, she has to leave medicine. So that obviously harms her, right? It harms the children that she's raising. And it also harms all her Muslim patients that come to her for healthcare. And who does it help? Well, in a place like Los Angeles, there are dozens and dozens of abortion clinics. So all it does is harm her patients, harm her children, and doesn't really help anyone since we already have all kinds of abortion clinics around. So this is something that benefits no one and
Mm.
harms a lot of people. So I think it's really in all of our interest to support conscientious objection.
Mm-hmm.
And the final reason is that it really supports development in medicine. So for instance, let's say you make it that all doctors have to perform euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide or get out of medicine.
Mm.
Well, what is that going to do for innovations in palliative care? In other words, right now, there's an incentive to develop palliative care as much as possible. But once you have euthanasia widely available and accepted, well, then they're going to say, look, why should we develop this palliative care to ease your pain at the end of life? You could just go commit suicide. You could get, euthanasia. And so that's on you if you choose not to do that. We're not going to develop special treatments for you to try to help ease your pain. And in a similar way with other treatments, the fact is that conscientious objection leads to the development of better healthcare. Just to use one more example, there are some doctors who reject the use of in vitro fertilization. And as a result of that, they developed a whole new way of treating infertility called NAPRO
Yes,
technology.
I've heard of this. Yeah.
And NAPRO technology has a success rate. In vitro fertilization has a success rate of about 30%. NAPRO technology has a success rate of about 80%.
And far more affordable.
Exactly.
And
More
waster of life.
affordable, and better results. So we want to encourage innovation in medicine. And I think that the abolition of conscientious objection is going to put a damper on innovations in palliative care and innovations in terms of treating infertility.
So basically, if Catholic healthcare gets driven out of medicine in the Western world, we're a lot worse off. So I will end it on that note, and thank you for your excellent contribution.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.